In an age of empires stretched thin and kingdoms lost in decay, a storm was brewing on the steppes of Asia. Not a kingdom, not a dynasty, but a force of nature. This is the story of how a scattered people of herders and hunters rose from the vast, unforgiving plains of Mongolia to forge the largest land empire the world has ever seen. From the ashes of tribal feuds, a warrior emerged, Temujin, a man without a crown, without noble blood, but destined to conquer history itself. Through fire and fear, he would become Genghis Khan. His horsemen would shatter cities, humble sultans, crush kingdoms, and reshape the map of the world. The legions of Rome are long gone. The Crusaders had yet to dream of Jerusalem, and in the silence between civilizations, the thunder of hooves begins to rise. This is not just the tale of conquest, it is the story of survival, ambition, and transformation, of how the steppe unleashed a fury that no war could hold back. This is the Mongol saga. You've heard of the Romans, you've heard of the Vikings, but this empire conquered more land than both. Combined, they weren't kings, they were horsemen, and they changed history forever. At the dawn of the 13th century, the lands of Eurasia were ruled by powerful civilizations. The Chinese dynasties to the east, the Islamic caliphates to the west, and the fragmented kingdoms of Europe to the northwest. Yet, in the heart of the continent, across a vast expanse of unforgiving grassland, there existed no empire, no city-states, no enduring kingdom, only wind, dust, and herds. This was the Mongolian plateau, a cold, dry highland sea of steppe, stretching from the Altai Mountains to the edge of the Gobi Desert, a landscape defined by extremes, where winters could freeze bone and summers scorch earth. It was here, amid the isolations and hardship, that a scattered people lived, fragmented into dozens of competing tribes, each clinging to survival. David O. Morgan was a British historian who was Professor Emeritus of History at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. His book, The Mongols, is considered a standard in the field. Originally published in 1986, a new expanded edition was published in 2007. He writes, "Before Genghis Khan, the Mongols were no more than one of many steppe peoples, distant, politically fractured, and barely visible to the great powers of Asia. The Mongol tribes were not a unified nation, but a shifting constellation of clans. The Tatars, the Merkits, the Naimans, the Karait, the Ongud. These groups shared language, customs, and horse culture, but they were locked in constant cycles of blood feuds, raids, and fragile alliances. Allegiances were temporary, loyalty conditional, and betrayal often inevitable. Leadership was earned through charisma, force, and fortune. In this tribal mosaic, war was a way of life. Children were taught to ride by the age of 3. Boys grew up hunting on horseback and mastering the composite bow, a weapon of deadly precision crafted from sinew, horn, and wood, light enough to shoot from a gallop, powerful enough to pierce armor." Peter Jackson is a British scholar and historian specializing in the Crusades, particularly the contacts between the Europeans and the Mongols, as well as medieval Muslim India. He is Emeritus Professor of Medieval History at Keele University and editor of the Cambridge History of Iran, the Timurid and Safavid periods. In his book, The Mongols and the West, from 2005, he notes, "On the steppe, mobility was survival, and war was memory. Power belonged not to those who ruled cities, but to those who controlled movement. Trade passed through the steppes, but its wealth did not linger. Chinese silks, Persian glassware, and Russian furs moved along the Silk Road, but the nomadic tribes were often viewed by their neighbors as thieves or barbarians. Yet they were not without governance. The Khans ruled by council, advised by shamans and war chiefs, and respected only so long as they could protect their people and bring victory. By the mid-12th century, the dominant power among the steppe peoples was not the Mongols, but the Karait and the Naimans, who competed for supremacy. The Mongols themselves were weakened, their leadership divided, their warriors scattered. Into this world, around the year 1162, a child named Temujin was born to a lesser Mongol noble named Ögedei. The boy's early life would be shaped not by power, but by abandonment. When Temujin was only 9, his father was poisoned by rival Tatars. Without a protector, his family was exiled from their own clan and left to starve on the open steppe. Miguel Biran is a historian of Inner Asia and a member of the Israeli Academy of Science and Humanities. She is one of the most prominent voices in recent Mongol studies. Her work links the Mongols with Islamic and Chinese worlds. In her book, Kaidu and the Rise of the Independent Mongol State in Central Asia from 1997, she writes, Temujin's rise from exile was not inevitable, it was extraordinary. His formative years were marked by betrayal, poverty, and raw survival, a crucible that forged one of history's most relentless leaders. Temujin's family lived off wild roots and hunted rodents. His mother Hoilun, abducted from another tribe years before, kept her children alive through strength and discipline. According to the secret history of the Mongols, Temujin murdered his half-brother Bekta over food, not merely out of hunger, but to assert dominance and claim leadership over the family. This act, brutal as it was, marked a turning point. It showed a willingness to assert power at any cost, and it underscored a key principle of steppe leadership. Authority came not from birth, but from boldness. Christopher Pratt Atwood is an American scholar of Mongolian and Chinese history. In his book Encyclopedia of Mongolia and the Mongol Empire from 2004, he writes, "In steppe society, a leader was not born into power, he seized it. The right to command was proven on the saddle and the battlefield, not in a lineage scroll." As a young man, Temujin began to forge alliances, first with the powerful Togrul Khan of the Karet, who had been an ally of his father, then with a blood brother named Jamukha, a fellow Mongol warrior. For a time, the three shared power. But ambition, that most dangerous currency, soon divided them. When Temujin's wife Berta was kidnapped by Merkit raiders, likely in retaliation for his father's past sins, Temujin sought help from his allies. Berta was rescued, but the raid set off a chain of vendettas. The rescue solidified Temujin's leadership, but also exposed the fragility of alliance. Over the following years, war broke out between him and Jamukha. In 1187, Jamukha defeated Temujin in a decisive battle, captured his men, and executed them by boiling. A method meant not only to kill, but to send a message. Temujin retreated, but he did not vanish. Over the next decade, he rebuilt his following from the ground up. What made Temujin different was not simply martial prowess, but his willingness to break steppe tradition. He promoted warriors based on loyalty and merit, not noble birth. He offered spoils to the poor, he abolished aristocratic privilege. For those left behind by older systems, he offered opportunity. Timothy May is professor of Central Eurasian history at University of North Georgia. In his book, The Mongol Art of War, he writes, Temujin restructured Mongol society in revolutionary ways. His rise was not just political, it was social, a vision of order where the old rules no longer applied. By the turn of the century, he had outmaneuvered every rival. The Tatars were destroyed, the Karait betrayed and crushed, the Naimans defeated. Jamukha, once a brother-in-arms, was captured and executed. The steppe, for the first time in memory, was united under a single warlord. In 1206, on the banks of the Onon River, a grand Kurultai was convened. The tribal leaders, warriors, and shamans proclaimed Temujin as the Genghis Khan, universal ruler of all Mongols. This moment marked the birth of an empire, not yet in territory, but in will. The fragmented clans had been forged into a single blade, and the world beyond the steppe, from China to Persia to the plains of Rus, would soon feel its edge. Reuven Amitai is an Israeli-American historian and writer. In his book Mongols and Mamluks, the Mamluk-Ilkhanid War from 1995, he writes, "The Kurultai of 1206 was a declaration, not just of unity, but of ambition. It signaled to the world that a new force had emerged, disciplined, hungry, and utterly without precedent. Genghis Khan now stood at the helm of a new kind of power, nomadic but unified, barbaric to some but ruthlessly organized. What would follow in the coming decades was more than a series of conquests. It was a tectonic shift in the order of the medieval world. The Mongol tribes had once wandered the steppes in small bands. Now under one banner they were preparing to ride east and west. The era of Genghis Khan had begun, and the old world would never be the same again." In the year 1206, on the banks of the Onon River, Temujin rose before the assembled tribes. The wind carried the smoke of sacrificial fires. The banners of wolf and sun fluttered in the mountain air. Around him stood the leaders of every defeated people of the steppe. Tatars, Karait, Merkits, Naimans, sworn now to one ruler. The shaman Teb Tengeri anointed him with the title Genghis Khan, universal ruler, and a new political order was born, the Great Mongol Empire. Peter Jackson writes, "The proclamation of 1206 created something wholly new, a super-tribal polity that replaced kinship with obedience and custom with law. It was the institutional birth of empire on the steppe." Genghis Khan's first act was not war, but organization. He abolished the old tribal names, integrating all men into a decimal hierarchy, units of tens, hundreds, thousands, and 10,000s. Each soldier owed loyalty directly to the Khan, not to his clan. Commanders were appointed for merit rather than birth, an innovation that broke centuries of aristocratic privilege. Timothy May observes, "This administrative revolution transformed the Mongol horde into a disciplined instrument of rule. The decimal system was both military and moral, replacing bloodline with function and enforcing unity through shared responsibility. The Yasa, a code of customary and moral law, regulated every aspect of life, from military discipline and taxation to family relations and the treatment of animals. It forbade theft, adultery, and the selling of women, while protecting envoys and granting freedom of religion." To the Mongols, this was not simply law, it was the embodiment of order itself, the written will of the Khan. He appointed his stepbrother Shikikutug as supreme judge, tasked with recording decrees on scrolls written in the newly adopted Uyghur script, a system adapted for the Mongol language. The steppe, once illiterate, now kept archives. Thomas Theodore Ulson was an American historian specializing in Mongolian studies. In his book Culture and Conquest in Mongol Eurasia, he observes, "The Yasa's genius lay in its pragmatism. It provided the foundation for imperial cohesion, a portable legal order that could govern across continents without fixed institutions or borders." Before turning outward, Genghis secured the heartland. He distributed conquered lands to his most loyal generals, including Jebe, Subutai, and Gelme, names that would become legendary in later campaigns. His family received far less. Power, he declared, was to be earned in the field, not inherited. He also restructured Mongol spiritual life. Though a shamanist himself, he invited Buddhist, Christian, and Muslim clergy to his camp, granting them protection and exemption from taxes. To rule the world, he needed the blessings of all its gods. Nicola de Cosmo is professor in East Asian Studies at the Institute for Advanced Study. In his book, Ancient China and Its Enemies, he writes, "Religious tolerance within the Mongol polity was not a sign of indifference, but of political genius. Genghis Khan recognized that empire demanded legitimacy in many tongues and under many heavens. The first external target lay to the south, the Tangut Kingdom of Western Xia. Its fortresses guarded the routes into northern China, and its tribute system symbolized centuries of Mongol subordination. In 1209, Genghis Khan invaded, surrounding the Tangut capital Yinchuan. The siege was fierce. The Mongols diverted rivers to flood the walls. When Western Xia capitulated, Genghis demanded troops, supplies, and the hand of a Tangut princess. The message was unmistakable. A new power had risen beyond the Great Wall. 3 years later, in 1211, the Khan turned on the Jin dynasty of northern China. The Jin of Jurchen descent had long dominated the steppes, extracting tribute from the nomads and manipulating tribal rivalries. Now, the balance of power had shifted. The Mongol army swept across the Great Wall at multiple passes, its horsemen moving faster than any Chinese force could respond. The Mongols captured Zhongdu, modern Beijing, in 1215, after a siege lasting months. Chronicles describe flaming oil and black smoke rising from the city as refugees fled toward the south. The fall of Zhongdu marked a psychological turning point. The barbarians from the north were no longer the raiders of legend. They were an army of empire. While China burned, trade caravans moved west toward the Islamic world. In 1218, Genghis Khan sent envoys and merchants to the Khwarezmian Empire seeking peaceful commerce. The Shah, Ala ad-Din Muhammad, distrusted him. At Otrar, the Mongol envoys were seized. The merchants were executed. Genghis Khan's response was methodical annihilation. In 1219, an army of perhaps 200,000 men crossed the Tian Shan Mountains. The cities of Bukhara, Samarkand, and Urgench fell in succession. The Khan entered Bukhara's great mosque, climbed its pulpit, and addressed the survivors. "If you had not committed great sins, God would not have sent a punishment like me upon you." This act, whether historical or apocryphal, symbolizes the fusion of vengeance and providence that marked Mongol ideology. Reuven Amitai in Mongols and Mamluks writes, "The Khwarezm campaign was both a military and psychological masterpiece. It demonstrated the Mongols' capacity for strategic depth, intelligence coordination, and punitive terror, a triad that defined their later wars. Tens of thousands were enslaved or executed. Survivors were dispersed across the empire, artisans sent to Karakoram, engineers to China, scribes to Persia. Yet the Mongols also reopened long-closed trade routes, securing caravans under military protection. Destruction and connectivity advanced together. At the core of the Mongol army was the Tumen, 10,000 mounted archers. Each man carried multiple bows and several horses. Communication across vast distances was achieved through flags, horns, and messengers riding in relays, a precursor to the later Yam postal system. Subutai, perhaps the greatest field commander of the medieval world, mastered the art of strategic envelopment. His campaigns in Persia and later in Europe would show unprecedented coordination over thousands of kilometers. David Morgan furthermore notes, the Mongol military system was not improvisation, but design, a synthesis of discipline, intelligence, and mobility unparalleled before the modern age. To the sedentary civilizations of Asia, Mongol warfare seemed demonic. Entire cities were annihilated when they resisted, spared when they surrendered. Terror was policy, designed to preempt rebellion and accelerate capitulation. Yet, alongside the brutality came pragmatism. Conquered artisans were resettled, scholars were patronized, administrators retained. After the fall of Khwarezm, Genghis Khan dispatched Subutai and Jebi on a reconnaissance expedition westward, a sweeping raid through Caucasia and into Kievan Rus. Their march of thousands of kilometers terrorized the region and revealed the strategic horizons of Mongol power. Meanwhile, the Khan returned east to punish Western Xia once more for rebellion. In 1226, his armies descended upon the Tangut lands. The campaign was devastating. Towns were erased, irrigation canals destroyed, and the Tangut kingdom obliterated. By the time of his death in 1227, Genghis Khan ruled an empire stretching from the Pacific to the Caspian Sea. He was buried in an unmarked grave somewhere near Burkhan Khaldun, his birthplace. The site has never been found. When he died, Genghis Khan left no monumental capital, no marble palaces, no libraries of law. His legacy was motion, a system of command, taxation, and communication that could function across the world's largest landmass. His successors would inherit both the method and the mission, to bring the entire world under the eternal blue sky. Mikhail Biran writes in her book Between China and Islam, the Administration of the Mongol Empire, Genghis Khan's achievement was not conquest alone. He created a framework of rule capable of sustaining the largest contiguous empire in human history, a paradox of order born from mobility. With his death, the empire entered its first moment of uncertainty. The Khan had appointed his third son, Ögedei, as heir, trusting that family unity would outlast his own authority. But the machinery he had built, the Yasa, the Tumens, the network of alliances, now faced its greatest test. Christopher Atwood writes, the succession crisis following 1227 revealed the paradox of Mongol governance, a system bound by absolute loyalty to a ruler who could not be replaced. The Khan was gone, but his shadow remained. From the Volga to the Yellow River, his generals sharpened their swords for the next campaign. The world had only glimpsed the beginning of the storm. Genghis Khan had built the empire. It was his son Ögedei who truly set it in motion. In 1229, 2 years after the death of Genghis Khan, the Mongol elite gathered once more in the sacred heartland. At a great Kuriltai held near the Onon River, the assembled princes of the blood formally confirmed Ögedei, the third son of Genghis, as great Khan of the Mongol Empire. This moment was not simply a ceremony, it was a test. Could the fragile unity forged by conquest survive the absence of its architect? David Morgan writes in his book, The Mongols, the succession of Ögedei is one of the great what-ifs of medieval world history. Had he not inherited both legitimacy and administrative clarity, the empire might have splintered within a generation. Ögedei was not the most charismatic nor the most militarily gifted of Genghis Khan's sons, but he possessed something essential: the respect of his siblings, the favor of his father, and the vision to turn conquest into control. He was a builder not just of empires, but of the infrastructure required to sustain one. Ögedei's early reign was marked by the institutionalization of the Mongol state. He ordered the construction of Karakorum, a new imperial capital on the Orkhon River. Though modest by Chinese or Islamic standards, Karakorum symbolized permanence, a seat of administration at the heart of a mobile empire. Ögedei also expanded the Yam postal system, a network of relay stations, fresh horses and supply depots stretching across the empire. Messages that once took weeks now traveled in days. With this, the Mongols created the first early modern communications network in Eurasia. Bingelbiren writes, under Ögedei, the Mongol Empire developed into a governed entity, no longer just a conquering horde, but a system of rule capable of managing taxes, enforcing law, and projecting power over space and time. Ögedei relied heavily on skilled administrators, many drawn from the conquered peoples. The Uyghurs, Khitans, Persians, and even North Chinese scholars were placed in key posts. This administrative cosmopolitanism was not merely convenience, it was doctrine. As the Yasa prescribed, talent came before tribe. One of Ögedei's first campaigns was the final destruction of the Jin dynasty. Though his father had delivered a crushing blow in 1215, remnants of the Jin still held territory in northern China. Ögedei led an army southward in 1232, accompanied by his top generals and his brother Tolui. The campaign was marked by a key innovation. The Mongols had captured Chinese engineers who now constructed counter-siege devices, catapults, battering rams, and fire lances. The Jin capital of Kaifeng fell in 1233 after prolonged siege. In 1234, the last Jin emperor was killed, and the dynasty collapsed entirely. The Mongols now controlled nearly all of northern China, and the Song dynasty to the south braced for war. Patricia Buckley Ebrey is an American art historian and sinologist specializing in cultural and gender issues during the Chinese Song dynasty. In her book, The Cambridge Illustrated History of China from 1996, she writes, "The conquest of the Jin was a symbolic and strategic watershed. With it, the Mongols proved that even China's Great Wall of history could be breached." While Ögedei focused eastward, his generals planned westward. At the 1235 Kurultai, a vast campaign was approved, the invasion of Eastern Europe. The supreme command was given to Batu Khan, a grandson of Genghis, and Subutai, now a veteran strategist in his 70s. The target, the Golden West, Russia, Poland, Hungary, and beyond. Timothy May in The Mongol Art of War observes, this was no raid. It was a coordinated strategic movement across 6,000 kilometers, a feat unmatched until Napoleon and Hitler marched the same terrain centuries later and with far less success. From 1236 to 1241, the Mongols executed a campaign of chilling precision. They crushed the Volga Bulgars, sacked Ryazan, Vladimir and Suzdal, and laid waste to Kiev in 1240. The city, once the Pearl of Rus, was left in ruins. Its population decimated. Chroniclers wrote that no eye remained to weep for the dead. In 1241, the Mongol campaign reached its apogee. Two great battles would decide the fate of Europe. Battle of Legnica, April 1241. Mongol forces led by Baidar and Kadan defeated a Polish-German army under Henry II of Silesia. European knights were lured into an ambush and annihilated. The Mongols used smoke signals and feigned retreats, tactics unknown to European warfare at the time. Battle of Mohi, April 1241. Just days later, Batu and Subutai crossed the Sajo River and crushed the Hungarian army. King Bela IV narrowly escaped. The battlefield was littered with corpses and crushed armor. Reuven Amita in Mongols and Mamluks notes, the dual victories at Legnica and Mohi displayed the full strategic genius of the Mongols: deception, coordination, mobility, and ruthless efficiency. Europe had never faced anything like it. With Central Europe laid bare, the path to Vienna, Prague, and even Rome seemed open. But just as the storm reached its peak, it stopped. In December 1241, Ögedei Khan died suddenly. The news reached the commanders in Europe early in 1242. According to Mongol custom, all members of the royal house were required to return to the heartland for the next Kurultai. The invasion of Europe was abandoned. Peter Jackson writes in his book, The Mongols and the West, from 2005, no battlefield halted the Mongols, only the death of a ruler. The retreat from Europe in 1242 was not defeat, but a dynastic pause. Ögedei's death marked the end of the first Mongol expansion phase, but his impact remained. He had turned the Mongol war machine into a governing body, extended its reach from Korea to the Danube, built infrastructure that connected Eurasia, and proved that the empire could outlive its founder. Thomas Alson writes, Ögedei was not a warrior poet nor a mystic conqueror. He was an executive emperor in many ways, the true father of the Mongol imperial system. His death would soon trigger a political crisis. The next generation, Güyük, Möngke, and eventually Kublai, would wrestle not only with enemies, but with each other. Under Ögedei, the Mongol Empire reached the edge of the known world, and yet this was only a prelude to the final act, the rise of a new generation of Khans who would turn conquest into civilization. The death of Ögedei did not end Mongol expansion, but it began the contest for who would control it. When Ögedei Khan died in 1241, the Mongol Empire stood astride the world like a colossus, its conquests stretching from the Korean peninsula to the gates of Vienna. Yet this immense power masked a growing instability. Beneath the surface of imperial unity, rival factions prepared for a struggle not over land, but over legitimacy. The succession of the next great Khan was far from inevitable. While Genghis Khan had named Ögedei as heir, no such clarity existed after his passing. As the Mongol elite gathered for the next Kurultai, the empire found itself not in war against outsiders, but locked in a political crisis that would shape its very soul. David Morgan writes, no empire built on conquest escapes the question of succession. For the Mongols, the real test began not on the battlefield, but in the sacred yurt, where Khans were made and unmade. After a prolonged interregnum of nearly 5 years, delayed by political maneuvering and fierce debates, Ögedei's son Güyük was elected Great Khan in 1246. His election had been championed by his mother, Turagena Khatun, who served as regent after Ögedei's death. For a time, Turagena ruled the empire from behind the curtain, replacing Ögedei's loyal ministers with her own allies. Güyük, once enthroned, quickly sought to reassert control. He restored some of his father's administrators and launched inquiries into the financial abuses committed under his mother's regency, but his authority was far from secure. Thomas Alson, in his book Culture and Conquest in Mongol Eurasia, published in 2001, explains, Güyük's reign was marked by a growing centralization of power, but also deepening internal rivalries. He inherited an empire, not a consensus. One of his most pressing problems was the escalating tension with Batu Khan, leader of the Golden Horde and victor of the European campaign. Batu, a grandson of Genghis through Jochi, refused to attend Güyük's Kurultai, citing illness. In truth, Batu feared that Güyük, backed by Ögedei loyalists, would marginalize the Jochid branch of the family. As Güyük began preparing an expedition westward, ostensibly to inspect the empire's frontiers, rumors spread that he intended to strike at Batu and secure total control. But fate intervened. In 1248, while marching westward with his army, Güyük suddenly died near the Sirdariev. His death, likely from illness, ended his reign after just 2 years. Some accounts, though unverified, whispered of poisoning, perhaps orchestrated by Batu himself. Regardless of the cause, the effect was seismic. Peter Jackson writes, the Mongol Empire was an empire of tents, and when the tent of the Khan collapsed, so too did the illusion of stability. With no adult Ögedei heir strong enough to claim the throne, the political vacuum widened. Batu seized the moment. From his base on the Volga, he proposed a new candidate, Möngke, the son of Tolui and grandson of Genghis Khan. The proposal shocked many. The Toluids, while respected for their military skill, had never held the imperial throne. But Batu, once Güyük's rival, now emerged as kingmaker. He summoned a Kurultai in 1251, gathering key supporters and proclaiming Möngke as Great Khan. Opposition came swiftly. Ögedei loyalists claimed the Kurultai had been illegitimate, held without full representation. Some princes refused to accept the decision, but Möngke and Batu responded with brutal efficiency. Those who opposed the new Khan were arrested, exiled, or executed, including many of Güyük's remaining allies. Michael Biren explains, the rise of Möngke marks a turning point, from the Ögedei legacy of administration to the Toluid vision of direct imperial dominance through loyal kin and total warfare. Möngke's enthronement marked the end of shared consensus rule and the beginning of dynastic consolidation. The empire was now clearly in the hands of Genghis Khan's youngest son's lineage, the Toluids. This line would soon produce Kublai Khan and dominate the remainder of Mongol imperial history. Möngke immediately set out to strengthen central control. He implemented a major census across all Mongol territories, from Persia to China to Russia, to streamline taxation and conscription. He also reinstated trusted administrators, including the Persian vizier Shams al-Din Juvaini, and Chinese scholars versed in Confucian bureaucracy. Reuven Amitai notes, the Mongol census under Möngke was an act of imperial redefinition. It wasn't just about revenue, it was about knowing the empire, classifying it, and owning it through knowledge. Religious freedom continued to be a Mongol hallmark. Möngke hosted debates at court between Buddhists, Muslims, Christians, and Taoists, each given the right to argue for their faith before the Khan. Though he personally leaned toward Buddhism, Möngke saw religion as a tool of diplomacy and imperial cohesion. But diplomacy was only one side of his reign. Möngke, like his grandfather, was a warrior at heart. Möngke launched two simultaneous military campaigns that would change the fate of the medieval world. The invasion of the Middle East, 1253 to 1258. Led by his brother Hulagu, the Mongols marched into Persia, defeating the Ismaili assassins and toppling the Abbasid Caliphate in Baghdad in 1258, a seismic event in Islamic history. The invasion of southern China. Möngke himself took command of a vast army to attack the Song dynasty, which still controlled the rich south. Unlike the steppes or the deserts, this was a campaign of rivers, jungles, and sieges. It would prove costly. Timothy May notes, the twin invasions of the 1250s represented the last unified thrust of the Mongol Empire. Beyond Möngke's reign, fragmentation and rivalry would begin to hollow the core of imperial unity. In 1259, during the southern campaign against the Song, Möngke Khan fell ill, possibly of dysentery or cholera, during the siege of Diaoyucheng near modern-day Chongqing. He died in camp, far from the capital he ruled, in the thick of war. His death, like that of Ögedei before him, triggered an immediate recall of Mongol commanders. The campaigns in the Middle East and China were paused. The generals and princes would now turn inward to fight not enemies, but each other. Though Möngke had ruled with strength and vision, he had left no clear successor. The result was a civil war between two brothers, Kublai, the ambitious governor of North China, and Arik Böke, backed by the traditionalist Mongol elite. This succession dispute would fracture the empire into independent khanates. The Yuan dynasty in China, Kublai, the Ilkhanate in Persia, Hulagu, the Chagatai Khanate in Central Asia. The Golden Horde in the west, ruled by Batu's descendants, the united Mongol Empire, was no more. Under Möngke, the Mongol Empire reached its geographic zenith, but the cost of expansion was unity. The death of one Khan gave birth to four empires and a new age of rivalry, adaptation, and transformation. From scattered steppe tribes to an empire spanning continents, the Mongol rise has been nothing short of astonishing. We've witnessed how Genghis Khan forged a nation from fire and fear, how his sons expanded it with ruthless precision, and how Möngke sought to hold it all together with administrative ambition. But the story of the Mongol Empire is far from over. In part 2, we follow the dramatic reign of Kublai Khan, the emperor who brought the Mongols to the heart of China and transformed them into rulers of one of history's greatest dynasties. We'll explore the bloody battles in the Middle East, the rise and fall of Mongol Islamic Khanates, the age of Pax Mongolica, and the final decline of the empire, as well as the lasting impact the Mongols had on global history. If you're interested in the broader world the Mongols helped shape, don't miss our deep dive into the history of Islam, where we explore the very regions the Mongols would later conquer, from the Abbasid Caliphate to the rise of the Ottomans. To make sure you don't miss part 2 and other deep historical explorations, subscribe to the channel, like the video, and click the bell for notifications. Thank you for watching the Mongol Saga. This is not just the story of conquerors, it's the story of how the medieval world was forever changed. We'll see you in part 2.